Statistically, the presence of a gun in a domestic violence situation makes it like 5 times more likely that a woman will be killed.
5 times? Yeah.
5 times. It is literally one of the most lethal factors in gender-based violence.
Absolutely.
And yet, if you look at mainstream feminist campaigns over the past few decades, gun control is, it's rarely positioned as a core defining feminist issue.
It barely even registers on the radar for the mainstream movement.
Right. So why the disconnect? Why do the issues that dictate actual life and death for some women get completely sidelined? Welcome to the Graduated Thought podcast.
It's a really jarring contradiction to start with, but I think it perfectly frames the exact blind spot we're examining today.
Yeah, exactly.
We're basically looking at a fundamental divide in how liberation is prioritized, and it depends entirely on where you are standing in society.
Which brings us to our mission for this deep dive. So this is an audio overview companion to the Centering the Margins video.
Right.
Today, we are taking a deeply academic concept feminism organized from the margins, and we're translating it into present-day, ground-level reality.
Because we want to explore what feminism actually looks like when it has to prioritize sheer physical survival over just acquiring privilege.
Exactly. And to do this, we're utilizing 2 incredible sources that essentially speak to each other across time. First, we have the foundational theoretical lens of bell hooks.
Specifically her work, Feminist Theory, From Margin to Center, and her essay, Choosing the Margin as a Space of Radical Openness.
Yeah. And then to ground all that high-level theory in the concrete, we are pairing it with Mikki Kendall's phenomenal book, Hood Feminism.
Which is just such a great pairing because Kendall essentially takes Hooks' academic theory and shows us exactly how it plays out today.
Right, in the grocery store aisles, the school systems, the neighborhoods of modern-day Chicago.
Yeah, she brings it right down to the pavement.
But before we really get into the weeds, I want you, the listener, to visualize how a map actually works mechanically.
Okay, I love this analogy.
Right. So think about opening a massive fold-out map or just zooming way out on your phone. Maps are designed to draw your eye to the center.
Where all the action is.
Exactly. That's where the capital city is, the major highways, the big bold text. But the edges, the margins, are where the details literally fade into empty white space.
Or they just get cut off entirely.
Yeah, exactly. But a map's design is a choice, It reflects the priorities of the person who drew it. So today, we are deliberately dragging our focus all the way out to those faded edges.
Because if you want to know how strong a building really is, you don't go up to the penthouse and inspect the crown molding.
Nope. You go down into the dirt and you inspect the foundation.
I think that's a really crucial framing for the listener. And before we dive into that dirt, I should make a brief note about the terrain we're covering today.
Yeah, that's important. Go ahead.
So the sources we are exploring today delve into some highly complex and politically charged topics.
For sure.
We're talking about the justice system, policing, systemic poverty, historical voting patterns, things like that.
Right.
Our role in this deep dive is to impartially report on the viewpoints, the lived experiences, and the sociological observations of bell hooks and Mikki Kendall.
We are just here to convey these ideas to help you understand the original source material.
Exactly. We are not endorsing any specific political platform. The goal is purely clarity and comprehension of their arguments.
Okay, so let's unpack this map analogy a bit more. Because when bell hooks talks about the margin, she is not just throwing around a cute academic metaphor.
No, not at all.
We really need to understand where the margin is and why operating from there provides such a unique perspective.
Well, for Hooks, the margin was a tangible physical geography long before she made it into a sociological theory.
Right, she grew up in Kentucky, right?
Yeah, in a small Kentucky town during an era where the margin was quite literally defined by the railroad tracks.
Oh, wow. Literally the other side of the tracks.
Exactly. If you were black, you lived in the shacks and the, structurally compromised houses across those tracks. That physical space was the margin.
And the center was everything else.
Right. The paved streets, the well-funded stores, the municipal resources, that was the center.
But I think the crucial mechanism here isn't just that these two spaces existed, right? It's how they interacted with each other.
Oh, absolutely.
Because the people living in the margins had to cross those railroad tracks every single day. They went into the center to work.
They were the maids, the janitors, the cooks.
Exactly. They were permitted to enter the center to provide essential labor, but they were entirely barred from residing there. And when the shift was over, they had to cross back over the tracks.
And this daily migration is what creates the core theory that Hooks brings forward.
The concept of radical openness, right?
Yes, exactly. Radical openness, or having an oppositional worldview. So let's think about the psychology of the people living in the center.
Okay.
If you live in the center, you only ever have to understand your own reality. The center's rules, its culture, its language, that is just the default setting of the world.
Because you never have to cross the tracks.
Right. You never have to cross the tracks to understand how the people in the margin live.
The system simply doesn't require you to. Your survival isn't dependent on understanding the margin at all.
Precisely. But the opposite is true for marginalized people. To survive, they are forced to become fluent in two completely different realities.
Oh, I see.
They have to deeply understand the center, its unspoken rules, its power dynamics, its economic levers, because their livelihood depends on navigating it successfully without stepping out of line.
But they also intimately know their own reality on the outside.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. It's like standing on the edge of a dense forest.
Okay, I like this.
If you are deep in the center of the woods, your vision is entirely blocked by the trees immediately around you. You think the whole world is just those trees.
Yeah.
But if you were standing on that margin, like right on the tree line, you can see the forest, but you can also see the open plains, the approaching weather systems, the entire ecosystem.
That holistic vision is exactly what Hooks means by radical openness. Now, the margin is undoubtedly a site of deprivation and systemic pain. We can't romanticize the suffering that happens there.
No, of course not.
But Hooks argues it is also a site of profound intellectual insight. It's a place where a truly inclusive resistance can be born because the people there understand the structural flaws of the entire map, not just the wealthy capital.
Which brings us perfectly to the lived embodiment of this theory, which is Mikki Kendall's grandmother.
Oh, yes.
In Hood Feminism, Kendall describes a woman who fundamentally lived this concept of radical openness. Let's look at the timeline, because Kendall's grandmother was born in 1924.
And that historical context is everything.
Totally.
The early 1920s is often celebrated in mainstream textbooks as this massive triumph for feminism because of women's suffrage.
Right, the right to vote.
Yeah, but Kendall's grandmother is a black woman being raised in the absolute height of Jim Crow America. So the victories of the 1920s center did not trickle down to her reality across the tracks.
Not at all. Yet by any modern behavioral metric, she was living a fiercely feminist life.
She really was.
Kendall notes that she had 4 daughters, and she didn't just encourage them to be independent, she mandated it.
Right.
Her foundational rule for her girls was go to school, secure an education, and ensure you have the financial means to survive without relying on anyone else.
Especially a man.
Yes, especially a man.
She was just highly pragmatic about survival. Like, when her husband pressured her to conform to the traditional gender role of the stay-at-home housewife, she seemingly agreed.
Wait, she agreed?
Well, seemingly, but only because she recognized she could run various side businesses and hustles directly from her living room.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Right. She completely refused to cede her economic autonomy. She prioritized self-sufficiency over societal expectations of what a good wife should be.
But the most fascinating detail Kendall shares is that despite this incredibly liberated lifestyle, her grandmother vehemently rejected the label of feminist.
She hated the word.
Yeah. If someone called her a feminist, she would push back hard. And you have to wonder, why would a woman who demands education and financial independence for all her daughters despise the very word that ostensibly champions those things?
Because of that radical openness we just discussed?
She could see the whole map.
Exactly. She looked at the mainstream feminist movement of her era and saw that its rhetoric was fundamentally built on classist and racist foundations.
Right.
The feminism being broadcast from the center was heavily focused on the right of white women to leave the domestic sphere and find fulfillment in the professional workforce.
But the obvious mechanical question is, and this is what she saw, if the women in the center are leaving the domestic sphere, who is doing the domestic labor?
Who's doing the cooking, the cleaning, the child rearing?
Exactly. And the answer was women of color.
It was. The liberation of the white middle-class woman was functionally dependent on hiring black and brown women as cheap, exploitable domestic labor.
Yeah.
Kendall's grandmother saw this equation clearly. She realized that a movement dedicated to getting white women into office jobs by putting black women into their kitchens was not a movement interested in her freedom.
Wow. Yeah, that puts it so starkly.
So she practiced a localized, survival-based feminism through her actions, but she completely rejected the academic ideology of the center.
I mean, that historical disconnect creates a massive ripple effect that brings us right to the present day.
Oh, definitely.
Because if I'm playing devil's advocate or just, asking the logical question, if the margin provides this incredibly clear view of society's structural flaws, why hasn't mainstream feminism learned from it?
That is the big question.
Right. Why does the movement still struggle with these exact same blind spots today?
Well, when you synthesize Hooke's theory with Kendall's modern observations, the answer really comes down to a brutal clash of priorities.
Okay, unpack that.
When you are operating from the center, meaning your basic survival needs like food, shelter, and physical safety are already met, your activism naturally pivots toward the acquisition of privilege.
And the removal of professional or social barriers.
Right. You want to shatter glass ceilings, you want representation in the boardroom, you want to dismantle the societal stigma around, women's body hair or the expectation to take a husband's last name.
And we should be clear, those are entirely valid issues for the people experiencing them.
Absolutely valid.
But when you operate from the margins, your baseline is fundamentally different. Your feminism isn't about acquiring privilege. It's about securing the literal right to exist.
Yes. And Hooks points out a foundational flaw in how the center defines success.
Yeah.
Mainstream feminism historically defined its ultimate goal as making women equal to men. But Hooks asks a devastatingly simple question: which men?
Man, that is a paradigm-shifting question. Which men? Because society isn't a flat plane.
Far from it. In a society deeply stratified by class and race, men are not a monolith of privilege. Does a marginalized working-class woman of color truly desire to be equal to a marginalized working-class man of color who is simultaneously being crushed by systemic poverty and police targeting?
No.
Obviously no.
When the center demands equality with men, the unspoken assumption is that the baseline standard is a wealthy, privileged white man.
This reminds me of an analogy. Imagine a house.
Okay.
The mainstream feminist movement is often like a homeowner who is rightfully frustrated by a cold draft in the attic. They are up there demanding better insulation, better windows, a fairer distribution of heat.
Sure.
And if you live in the attic, that draft is a serious problem. But meanwhile, they're completely ignoring the fact that the people living in the basement are actively dealing with a catastrophic flood.
Wow, yeah.
The basement is literally filling with water. You cannot expect the people in the basement to sign a petition about attic insulation when they are desperately treading water.
That perfectly illustrates Kendall's frustration. And she brings that flooded basement to life with devastating clarity in the book, especially when examining basic needs.
Yes, exactly. So let's explore the first scenario Kendall maps out: hunger and the modern food desert.
This is where Kendall's lived experience just cuts right through the academic theory.
It really does.
She writes very openly about a period in her life after a divorce where she was navigating single motherhood. She was living in public housing. She was heavily reliant on food stamps and a state medical card.
Yeah.
And she shares this incredibly vulnerable memory of breaking down in tears because she literally could not afford to buy a Christmas tree for her child.
And, sharing that level of vulnerability is a radical act in itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Because our society, and often the more affluent center of the feminist movement, views poverty through a lens of profound moral judgment.
Let's unpack that judgment because it's everywhere. We all know the stereotype, right?
Oh, yeah.
Society loves to judge the poor mother who is seen buying like a bag of highly processed chips and a 2-liter soda for her kid at a bus stop.
The narrative immediately becomes, look at her poor choices.
Right. She lacks education on nutrition. She isn't prioritizing her child's health. It's framed entirely as an individual moral failing.
Which completely ignores the mechanical reality of systemic poverty and what Kendall describes as a food desert.
Let's talk about the logistics of that.
The judgment from the center assumes that everyone has equal access to a fully stocked, well-lit supermarket brimming with fresh, affordable produce.
Which they just don't.
Right. In the margins, that infrastructure simply does not exist. Zoning laws, redlining, corporate profit models, all of this means that massive swaths of urban and rural neighborhoods have no grocery stores at all.
So if we actually play out the logistics, let's say you live in a food desert and you want to buy fresh vegetables, how do you actually do it?
Well, first, you likely don't have a reliable car.
Right. So you are relying on public transit. You have to take a bus, maybe transfer to a train, travel 45 minutes outside your neighborhood.
Just to get to a store.
Yes. Then you have to do the shopping. Now, you have to carry those groceries. Have you ever tried to carry 40 pounds of groceries?
It's exhausting.
Now, try carrying them onto a crowded bus, off the bus, and down 3 blocks to your apartment, all while potentially holding a toddler's hand.
The physical toll is enormous, but, the logistical hurdles don't even stop there.
Right.
Think about it. Fresh food is highly perishable. If your marginal housing situation involves an unreliable ancient refrigerator, or perhaps you are renting a single room and only have access to a mini fridge, that fresh produce is going to rot before you can consume it.
And when you are living on a micro budget, rotting food isn't just an annoyance, right?
No, it is a catastrophic waste of the very few dollars you have to survive.
And we haven't even touched on time poverty.
Oh, time poverty is huge.
The center often assumes the luxury of time. But if you're working 2 or 3 low-wage, unpredictable shifts just to prevent eviction, when exactly do you have the 2 free hours required to wash, chop, season, and roast fresh vegetables?
You don't. You simply don't.
So when we re-examine that mother buying the chips and soda at the bus stop, the entire narrative shifts. It is not a moral failing or a lack of nutritional education. It is a highly rational, calculated survival choice dictated by a hostile environment.
Because that processed food is cheap.
Right. It is calorie dense. It will not spoil if the fridge breaks. And most importantly, it stops her child from crying from hunger in that immediate moment.
When you break it down mechanically like that, it makes total sense. And it highlights Kendall's core argument, which is that food insecurity, reliable public transit, a living wage, and stable housing are not secondary political issues.
No.
They are the primary, most urgent feminist issues of our time.
Because the mechanics of activism require baseline survival. If a woman is starving, if she is facing imminent eviction, she simply does not have the bandwidth to fight for reproductive rights or equal pay or political representation.
Ensuring that foundational human needs are met is the absolute prerequisite for any true gender equity.
It goes right back to the foundation of the building. You can't worry about the glass ceiling if the floor beneath you is completely collapsed. But that disconnect between the attic's priorities and the basement's reality becomes even more severe when we look at physical safety.
This is a critical transition in Kendall's work.
Yeah.
How is the concept of safety experienced from the margins versus the center?
Well, let's go back to the statistic I mentioned at the very top of the show. Gun violence.
Right.
For the center, gun violence is often treated as a broader political talking point, maybe discussed during election cycles.
Yeah, as an abstract issue.
But Kendall describes it as an inescapable environmental reality. She tells this visceral story from her childhood. She is 6 years old, walking out of a beauty shop with her grandfather.
Oh, this story is wild.
Suddenly, a gunfight erupts between 2 strangers right there on the sidewalk. Her grandfather reacts instantly, grabbing her by the hair and physically yanking her out of the crossfire.
Yeah.
And she recalls that a bullet passed so close to her face that it sizzled the ends of her bangs off. 6 years old.
It is a terrifying image, and it forces a complete reevaluation of what constitutes a women's issue. Kendall challenges the listener to understand why firearms dictate the boundaries of survival for women in the margins. Because, as you noted, a gun in a home with a history of domestic violence increases the risk of homicide for the woman by 500%.
500%. And Kendall herself is a survivor of a deeply abusive marriage.
Yes, she is.
She writes with this haunting clarity about her escape. When she finally managed to leave that toxic environment, her ex-husband escalated his behavior. He stalked her. He threatened her continuously.
Right.
And she states, without hesitation, that the singular reason she is alive today to write this book is because he did not have access to a gun.
Wow.
He had his rage and he had his physical strength, but he lacked the projectile weapon that could end her life in a fraction of a second from across the room.
Which means by ignoring or sidelining the proliferation of firearms, mainstream feminism is ignoring the primary mechanism of fatal violence against marginalized women.
Exactly.
And the collateral damage of this environmental violence is just staggering. It alters the trajectory of entire lives.
Kendall talks about a 12-year-old girl who was shot on a porch just blocks from her home.
Yeah.
And the psychological adaptation to this environment is profound. She discusses how young girls in these neighborhoods will literally drop out of school.
Which is devastating.
And they aren't dropping out because they don't value education or because they aren't capable. They are stunting their entire economic future simply to avoid the daily terror of walking through territories where shootings are a regular occurrence.
I mean, think about the global campaigns mainstream feminism champions regarding girls' education in developing nations.
Yes.
Yet, right here, domestically, girls are sacrificing their education to avoid catching a stray bullet on a Tuesday morning.
It creates a state of perpetual hypervigilance.
It really does. Kendall notes that she was eventually diagnosed with PTSD, but for years, she genuinely believed her constant humming state of high alert was just normal human behavior.
Because in her environment, hypervigilance wasn't a disorder.
No, it was a required life skill.
Okay, so if we agree that violence is a primary feminist issue, we have to talk about how society handles violence.
Right.
Because if a woman in the center feels her physical safety is threatened, the default societal script is automatic. Call the police. The justice system is viewed as a protective shield.
But for women in the margins, the state, what sociologists call the carceral state, frequently acts as a weapon rather than a shield.
Okay, before you go further, for anyone listening who might hear carceral state and think of a textbook, what exactly are we talking about in practical terms?
That's a great question. The carceral state refers to the entire system of policing, surveillance, courts, and prisons that a society relies on to manage social problems.
Okay.
It's the idea that our default solution to conflict is punishment and incarceration. For the center, this system feels protective. But for the margins, this system is often the source of the trauma.
And Kendall brings up a tragic and raging example to illustrate this. The story of Rakia Boyd.
Yes. Rakia Boyd was a 22-year-old black woman in Chicago. She was hanging out in a local park with friends on a warm evening.
Is living her life.
She was doing absolutely nothing illegal. A man near her was holding a cell phone. An off-duty police officer decided that cell phone was a gun, opened fire into the group, and shot Rakia in the head, killing her.
God.
She was just existing in her own neighborhood.
So put yourself in the shoes of a marginalized woman facing domestic violence or neighborhood violence.
Right.
The center tells you to call the police for help. But doing so requires a terrifying, impossible calculus. You're essentially rolling the dice with your life.
You really are.
You might get a compassionate officer who de-escalates the situation. Or you might invite a second, potentially lethal form of violence police brutality into a situation that is already highly volatile.
As Kendall starkly points out, introducing a second predator to stop a first predator is not a viable or logical safety plan.
No, of course not.
It simply increases the statistical likelihood of death or incarceration for someone in the community.
But I have to push back here. I really struggle with this piece of the framework.
Okay, let's hear it.
If we acknowledge that marginalized women are deeply vulnerable to male violence within their own neighborhoods, but we're also saying that relying on the police is too dangerous because of state violence, where is the safety net?
Yeah, it's a huge dilemma.
If you completely abandon the state systems, aren't you just leaving these women defenseless? Doesn't relying solely on community justice just invite vigilantism? Or worse, allow abusers to hide because nobody wants to call the cops?
That is a phenomenal pushback, and honestly, it gets to the absolute bleeding edge of where marginal feminist theory operates.
Okay.
Hooks and Kendall would argue that it's not about wanting to abandon the state, it's recognizing that the state has already abandoned them.
Yeah.
It is already structurally broken for them. Therefore, waiting for the police to become a safe option isn't practical for survival today.
So what is the alternative? How do they actually survive the night?
The alternative is incredibly difficult, messy work. Because they cannot safely rely on the carceral state, marginalized communities are forced to invent alternative, collective survival tactics.
What does that look like?
The entire paradigm of feminism shifts. It moves away from the center's focus on individual empowerment, like a single woman finding her voice and leaning in, and it pivots entirely to community health.
So it's more collective.
Very much so.
Yeah.
It becomes about whisper networks to identify abusers, pooling resources to relocate victims safely, and community intervention that doesn't involve the judicial system.
It's less about I am invincible and more about how do we keep each other alive right now?
Exactly. But, as you rightly pointed out in your pushback, turning inward to the community for protection is not a utopia.
No.
It comes with its own incredibly complex set of traps, pressures, and internal patriarchies.
Which perfectly bridges us into how this plays out in raising the next generation. Let's talk about parenting in the margins.
And specifically, the school-to-prison pipeline.
Yes. Kendall paints this vivid picture of the sheer anxiety involved in what she calls parenting while marginalized.
To understand this, let's contrast two hypothetical but statistically common scenarios.
Okay.
Picture a typical middle school classroom. A white teenage girl from an affluent suburb acts out. Perhaps she commits a minor act of vandalism on school property, or she screams at a teacher. How does the administration typically respond?
Generally, through lens of grace.
Mm-hmm.
They look at the behavior and say, she must be going through a difficult time at home, or this is a cry for help. Let's get the school counselor involved and talk to her parents.
Right.
The behavior is medicalized or treated as an emotional issue.
Precisely. Now, place a Black teenage girl in an underfunded inner-city school and have her commit that exact same infraction.
It's totally different.
The administrative lens shifts completely. It is no longer viewed as a developmental mistake or a cry for help. It is instantly criminalized.
Yeah.
The school resource officer, who is a police officer, is called. She is physically restrained, suspended, or expelled, and funneled directly into the juvenile justice system.
This is the literal mechanics of the school-to-prison pipeline.
It is.
The fundamental grace of childhood, the societal permission to make stupid mistakes, learn from them, and grow, is systematically denied to marginalized children. Their mistakes are treated as inherent criminality.
Which means parents in the margins are carrying an impossible, agonizing burden.
Absolutely.
They aren't just trying to raise a child to be kind and capable. They are actively navigating a minefield where one normal, impulsive teenage decision could result in a permanent criminal record, or worse, physical harm from the state.
And this intense pressure cooker, this desperate need to protect children from a hostile system, gives rise to a deeply complex internal dynamic known as respectability politics.
Respectability politics is a fascinating, though ultimately tragic, sociological phenomenon.
Tell me more about that.
It's a survival strategy developed internally within marginalized communities. The core belief is that if you can perfectly assimilate to the dominant culture's standards, if you dress impeccably, speak with flawless standardized grammar, maintain perfect grades, and act incredibly demure and ladylike,
then you'll be safe.
right, you can project a magical shield of respectability that will protect you from racism and sexism.
It's the desperate hope that if you play by the center's rules better than the center does, the system won't crush you.
Yes. It's an attempt by the community to internally police its own members, hoping to buy safety through conformity.
But Kendall writes about how she realized very early in her life that performing goodness was a complete illusion.
It offered absolutely zero material protection.
In fact, she noted it often made her more vulnerable.
Yeah, how so?
Predators in her environment didn't look at a perfectly polite, quiet, respectable girl and think, oh, I should leave her alone. They saw her performance of goodness as a sign of weakness.
Oh, wow.
They saw a target who had been conditioned not to make a scene, not to yell, and not to fight back because she was too worried about maintaining her respectability.
And this realization forced Kendall into a radical adaptation.
Yeah.
She writes that she had to actively learn how to be a bad girl. She had to cultivate a persona that was loud, aggressive, and willing to fight.
She had to be tough.
She had to project an aura that if someone tried to cross her boundaries, she would make them deeply regret it. That aggression wasn't a personality flaw. It was a calibrated armor required to survive an environment where politeness equaled victimization.
This internal policing of behavior takes an even darker turn when applied to young girls hitting puberty.
It really does.
Kendall discusses a phenomenon that is deeply prevalent in marginalized communities. The labeling of maturing girls as fast.
The fast-tailed girls. This is a profoundly painful dynamic to unpack.
Yeah.
When a young Black girl begins to physically mature, perhaps she develops earlier than her peers, or she starts experimenting with makeup or wearing shorts in the summer, the community often reacts with harsh, overwhelming criticism.
They label her as fast.
Yes, implying she is sexually promiscuous or actively inviting trouble.
Now, if we look at the psychology behind this, the intent from the community is often rooted in a twisted form of protection. The adults in the community know all too well that the outside world hypersexualizes Black girls and affords them zero protection. They know the dangers are real.
So they panic.
Right. In a panic, the community tries to forcefully clamp down on the girl's expression to hide her from predators.
But the impact of that internal policing is devastating. It actively victim blames the child.
It does.
It teaches a young girl that her natural changing body is inherently dangerous and shameful. And worse, it instills the belief that if a predator does attack her, it is ultimately her own fault for wearing the wrong clothes or being too fast.
It does the exact same oppressive work as the patriarchy, but it's coming from inside the house.
This is perhaps the most brilliant synthesis of bell hooks' theory and Kendall's modern observations.
Oh, how so?
Well, Hooks discusses how patriarchy is a global system, but Kendall shows us the mechanical reality of how it operates inside marginalized spaces. It functions as a funhouse mirror reflection of the white supremacy outside of it.
That's a great way to put it.
The men in the community, who are systematically stripped of their power, economic agency, and dignity by the external racist society, often try to reclaim a sense of control and masculinity by enforcing strict, toxic gender hierarchies internally against the women and girls in their own neighborhoods.
This is where we really have to introduce the concept of intersectionality.
Yes, crucial concept.
For anyone unfamiliar, intersectionality,
Mm.
a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, is the understanding that different forms of discrimination don't operate independently. They overlap and multiply.
A compound.
Right. If you're a marginalized woman, you aren't just fighting sexism on Mondays and racism on Tuesdays. You are fighting a two-front war every single day.
Exhausting.
You are battling the white supremacist patriarchy of the external dominant culture, and you are battling the reactive, toxic patriarchy operating within your own community.
It is an incredibly complex, exhausting reality, and this leads us to the final and perhaps most actionable section of our deep dive.
Okay, let's get into it.
If the margins are doing all of this unimaginably heavy lifting, if they are fighting on multiple fronts, inventing alternative justice systems, and securing basic survival for their communities, how should the people living comfortably in the center interact with them?
Right. How can mainstream feminism engage without inflicting further harm?
This is where both Hooks and Kendall issue very stark warnings. They heavily caution against the phenomenon of the oppression tourist.
The oppression tourist. This is an incredibly common archetype in activist spaces.
Oh, extremely common.
This is the individual from the center who parachutes into the margin, not to dismantle the systems of power, but to consume the experience.
Yep. They demand that marginalized women educate them for free.
Yes, they seek out marginalized spaces to soothe their own white guilt, or they eagerly consume stories of trauma so they can performatively demonstrate how, woke and enlightened they are to their peers in the center.
Bell Hooks refers to this dynamic as the discourse of the other.
Discourse of the other.
The center wants to appropriate the edgy aesthetic of radical resistance, but they absolutely refuse to take on the physical, social, or economic risks required to actually dismantle the status quo.
It is an inherently extractive relationship, and Kendall points to a very specific, stark, sociological data point to illustrate just how conditional and fragile this mainstream solidarity really is.
She examines the demographic voting data from the 2016 United States presidential election.
And to be clear to the listener, we are examining this data point purely through the lens of Kendall's sociological analysis of voting behavior and what it reveals about feminist solidarity across class and racial lines.
Precisely. Kendall highlights the statistic that 53% of white women voted for a candidate whose campaign, in her sociological analysis, relied heavily on rhetoric that stoked xenophobia and fear of marginalized communities.
Wow.
For Kendall, this statistic was a devastating, undeniable betrayal of the mainstream concept of universal sisterhood.
So, mechanically, why does that happen? Why would women in the center vote in a way that actively endangers women in the margins?
Because of proximity to power.
Proximity to power. Explain that.
Kendall argues that when the chips are down, a majority of women in the center recognize that their race and class grant them a protective proximity to the white patriarchal power structure.
Wow.
Instead of risking that comfort to stand in true solidarity with marginalized women who are directly threatened by xenophobic policies, they instinctively vote to protect their own elevated status within the existing hierarchy.
It exposes the reality that solidarity is frequently a one-way street.
It really is.
The center expects the margins to show up, march, and vote for issues like equal pay in corporate settings or representation in media. But when the margins are desperately fighting against police brutality, mass deportation, or the loss of basic housing, the center is conspicuously absent.
Which brings us to a crucial, actionable framework that Kendall lays out. She demands a transition away from the concept of being an ally and toward the necessity of being an accomplice.
This is one of my favorite distinctions in the Elaret book.
It's so powerful.
Because the language we use matters. Let's break down the mechanics of the difference. What exactly is an ally in this theoretical context?
Well, an ally is someone who possesses privilege and genuinely believes in the cause of the marginalized, but their participation is ultimately passive and safe.
They're not risking anything.
Right. An ally stands on the sidelines cheering. They might wear the branded T-shirt to a designated march. They might thoughtfully retweet an article. They might engage in a book club discussion.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, their bodily autonomy, their career, and their social standing remain completely insulated from risk.
They believe in the fight, but they aren't actually in the ring.
Mm.
So how does an accomplice operate differently?
An accomplice abandons the safety of the sidelines. An accomplice actively steps onto the field and physically, economically, or socially places themselves between the oppressive systems and the marginalized people.
That's a huge difference.
It is. An accomplice weaponizes their unearned privilege to absorb the blows meant for someone else. They take on tangible risk. They put their own capital, whether it's financial, social, or professional, on the line to dismantle the barrier.
Kendall provides a brilliant, positive blueprint for what this looks like in practice, and it involves the comic book writer Gail Simone.
Oh, this is a great example.
The mainstream comic book industry is notoriously insular and heavily male-dominated.
Yes, very much so.
It would have been incredibly easy and honestly socially expected for Gail Simone, a white woman who had fought tooth and nail to secure her own slice of power and influence in that industry, to simply pull the ladder up behind her.
She could have easily just protected her own hard-won territory.
And occasionally tweeted about the need for diversity, right?
But that's the ally approach. Simone chose the accomplice route.
Yes. When Simone connected with Mikki Kendall, she didn't just offer sympathy or empty platitudes about how hard the industry is for Black women.
She took immediate material action.
She actively reached back, utilized her significant leverage, and pulled Kendall directly into the industry.
She shared her established platform.
She forced doors open that were previously locked, and she used her social capital to fundamentally change the economic and professional reality of a marginalized creator. She took a risk to redistribute power.
That is the exact mechanical model for how the center must interact with the margins if there is ever to be true liberation.
Right.
True feminism, as both Hooks and Kendall powerfully argue, cannot operate like Reaganomics. It does not trickle down from the corporate boardroom to the city streets.
It simply doesn't work that way.
No. It must be built from the foundation up. It must be organized from the margins, centering the most vulnerable first.
Because the logic is undeniable, really. If you center the needs of the most marginalized, if you build a society that ensures everyone has unrestricted access to food, safe public transit, stable housing, and true freedom from both interpersonal and state violence, you automatically ensure that those basic human needs are met for everyone else in the center, too.
Exactly. If you fix the catastrophic flooding in the basement, you inherently stabilize the entire house.
The attic isn't going to fall in.
We've covered a tremendous expanse of conceptual and literal ground today.
We really have.
We've traced the geography of oppression from the physical railroad tracks of Bell Hooks' Kentucky childhood to the intricate web of grocery aisles, public transit, and school disciplinary systems of Mikki Kendall's modern Chicago.
We've seen how a feminism rooted in the margin demands a focus on messy, complex, often dangerous survival, rather than the neat, polite, corporate acquisition of privilege.
And we've seen that true solidarity requires the center to take on risk, to act as accomplices rather than passive allies. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over in your own time.
Let's hear it.
We began by visualizing a map, noting how our eyes are trained to seek out the center and ignore the margins. I want you to imagine the map of your own life right now. What would actually change if you stopped measuring your personal progress by the traditional default metrics of the center metrics, like corporate status, financial accumulation, or societal respectability?
Wow.
What if, starting tomorrow, you measured the success of your life by the radical openness of the margin? How much of your daily energy is currently directed toward community survival, collective care, and authentic resistance?
That's powerful.
And perhaps the most uncomfortable, necessary question to ask yourself: what parts of your own identity, your own sharp edges, have you actively silenced, polished, or hidden away just so you could fit comfortably into the center?
That is a profound question, and one that will undoubtedly sit with you long after the audio stops playing. It demands that we all reevaluate the foundations of the maps we are using to navigate the world. Thank you for listening to the Graduated Thought podcast.
If you're feeling the vibe, stick around for a little while. Don't forget to like and subscribe, like and subscribe.